Okay, everyone. Sorry we're a couple minutes late here. We just had to reboot all the machines to get the screen share to work. So I think we're. Can everyone see the screen? You can just IM in the IM window. So yeah. Okay, so this is the first CAD webinar. So this will be a learning experience for us. Make sure everything goes smoothly, hopefully. So we plan on doing these monthly, and we'll go over some of the upcoming topics here. But this first one is on resurfacing, widening existing pavements. So Eric Thomas will be kind of running through some examples of this topic here, but just some overview, since this is a good audience to kind of go over some things. Hopefully you guys all kind of got this information maybe relayed from your CAD managers, because we just showed this to them like a couple weeks ago. But these are already overview training classes that we have scheduled for the next year. It's self-enrolled on o.learn. So I think Kyle just made it easier to find the classes, right, Kyle?
Yep.
What's the
folder name? It's underneath the planning and engineering group if you wanted to just browse to it, or you can search Open Roads Designer in the search bar, and it'll bring up all the trainings by date.
So those are the ones we have coming up. Just another important note is that your supervisor has to approve that after you enroll. We don't see it on our end until your supervisor has approved it. So those are some upcoming dates. Those are a 2-day ORD training that we've been doing for the past year. I'm not going to go into detail, but I wanted to mention that we are working on a wiki page, and the link, you can just open it up. But this is where we're going to organize all of our training content. The recordings of these videos will go there. You'll find all of our YouTube videos. We'll be organizing them inside this wiki page, and then as well as like our actual training guides that we have. You can find them here, as well as solution videos. So it's still a work in progress. We got a lot more videos to add, but I just want to inform you guys all that that's what we're working on. I'm sure you guys will come across it here eventually. So the webinars, so this is the first one on widening, resurfacing existing pavement. Here's our tentative schedule. By no means do we have to keep this order, and that kind of came up at a CAD meeting. So we'll probably solicit feedback, maybe shifting these things around, but tentatively this is what we're looking at. And I also wanted to mention we do CAD user group meetings that are open to the consultant world. We hold it in the auditorium. You guys are more than welcome to come to that as well. It's not just limited to consultants here. It is in the auditorium, so there will be a live webcast link that you can watch. So you don't have to drive into central office. But these are kind of our dates that we scheduled out here. So you can see the next one coming up is in about 2 weeks on February 11th. And the agenda is out on our webpage. Sign up. You can register. Okay, let me jump out of this for a second. I can pull out the registration link, but if you go to our CAD webpage, it is there too. So, not sure what happened, but we froze up there for a second. All I was going to say is the sign up for this can be found on our CAD page. So, so there's kind of topics You can get the full agenda here, registration here. So if you guys are interested in any topics we're showing, you guys are more than welcome to come to that as well. So that's all I really had for the overview part. Just kind of some stuff that we're working on and upcoming training and events. So now we're going to switch over to what this webinar is actually about. So Eric is going to be running through this. So he's got some slideshow and he's going to do some examples of how to do some different things.
Okay, so one of the things that's come up just kind of after we did our first round of the overview training was that there were a lot of people involved in some widening and resurfacing type projects, and we didn't really cover any of that in the training. So we thought that might be a good topic just to kind of kick off the Skype meetings. So here's kind of what I want to take a look at. We got JD's slides, so let's go down here. So I want to talk a little bit about the profiles for widening resurfacing. We could use our existing profile or just make a proposed profile for just a resurfacing type thing. So I'll show you some profile things that we didn't talk about in the training. Then I'm going to take a look at some different templates and the components that the software provides for overlay and for stripping of existing pavement. So I've got a couple different examples I want to demonstrate, and we'll talk about the component quantities. And then the last thing we want to take a look at is just showing some existing features in the cross sections. So things like existing pavement, you actually need to model that in order for it to show in a 3D model, and then that'll be picked up in the cross section. So we'll show you a couple different ways that can be done. So here's just a screen capture when I was working on some stuff to get ready for this. So my plan view, just showing you know, what was generated from the corridor. Profile view, this was one where I was just adding a 3-inch overlay, so I just made a profile that ties in and then goes up to that 3 inches. And just an example of the cross section here in the 3D model it's generated. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at in a couple different examples. Now, I'm not an expert in widening and resurfacing, so you guys that are doing this type of work, we're definitely looking for feedback on what else that we could provide or different types of projects that you're working on that we don't cover today. So this isn't going to necessarily be comprehensive, just more of an introduction to the available tools. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is the profiles, and if you remember from the training, profiles are a component of our horizontal geometry, and they're stored in the BK file itself, and we just open a profile view window to see that, make edits to it, and all that. So I can process resurfacing either using the existing or the proposed profile, either one. And there's a couple tools that we really didn't cover in the training. So from our Open Roads Modeling workflow under geometry in the profile group, profile from surface command, and that's going to allow us to generate a profile getting the elevations from the surface by draping the element onto the surface. But this one has a couple of options in there that I can include a starting and stopping location, and I can also include horizontal and vertical offsets. So if I just need a profile that's 3 inches above the existing, that's one way, or probably the best way to generate that profile. Now the profile it creates is just an offset from the terrain, so it's not a profile with vertical curves and things like that. So it's not something that you can edit. But there's other ways to generate profiles from our existing using the best fit command that does give us something we can edit. So there's that tool, the profile from surface. There's also another one. I don't know if I have a slide for it. I probably don't. There's another one that's just a quick profile from surface. The only difference is the quick profile from surface doesn't really give you any options. It's just draping that element on the surface for the full length of the element and making a profile. So there's a couple tools that we had not talked about there that I'll show you. So just a little tip, if I'm going to extract a profile from existing ground using a vertical offset, maybe 3 inches above, I'm going to make sure I start that at the starting and ending location of the stations where I'm going to be in a full overlay depth. And then I'll use a separate profile line to draw in that taper where I'm meeting the existing surface at each end. And then I'll just complex that together. So I'm going to step through that. So I'm actually in the wrong file for that, I think. Let me get this out. Yeah, so I'm going to open my BK file that has my geometry. And I elected to do this that's what I was afraid of. I elected to do this in a live demo mode rather than use canned videos. And then I did something this morning when I was running through it. I think might have corrupted my data. So hopefully things are going to run okay for me. So we'll just see. And maybe that'll be a lesson learned from this first webinar is don't do live data, use videos. But so we'll see how this goes. All right, so let me open that. Clicked on the wrong one. So we're off to a great start this morning. I'll open the BK file after this opens. So Kyle, are you monitoring a chat window?
Yep.
If that,
yeah,
okay.
Okay.
So you guys can feel free to enter anything in the chat. Kyle's going to monitor that, and we can answer as we go. Are we leaving the audio live for the other people, Kyle?
It is.
Okay.
Hopefully not too many interruptions.
Yeah, so you're free to ask questions as we go. All right, let me get the geometry file. And then I'll take a look at the profile in that file. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just select my center line, and from the pop-up menu, I'm just going to open a profile window. So that's one way to do that. In the training, we also showed you holding down the right mouse button and using the pop-up menu to open two views. So there's a couple different ways you could do that. I'll just do it there and then click in that view, and that shows my existing profile from my terrain. So the existing profile itself is not a named profile. It's just a element that's draped from the terrain. That can be set as the active profile. So if you're going to process using the existing ground, that's all you really need to do is just open that profile window and set that as the active profile. It's not, like I said, it's not a named profile. If I look at its properties, it's telling me that it's draped from the triangles, and it's using the feature definition that was defined on the triangle model itself. So that's something on profiles, the existing ground profile. Its level, color, style, display really comes from the terrain, the feature of that terrain model. So what I'm going to do is create an offset profile from this. So in my geometry tools in the vertical group, there's a profile creation drop down. So there's those two commands I mentioned, the profile from surface and quick profile from surface. And again, the quick profile doesn't allow you to define starting, ending stations or horizontal or vertical offsets. So I'm going to use this profile from surface, and I do want to assign a feature for this. So it's not intuitive, but the alignment controls the proposed profile symbology. So I will just use one of my alignments, and then I can give this a name if I want. I'll just name it offset or something. So it's asking me to locate the element that I'm going to profile. So I'm going to pick my plan view element, and it's asking me for a next element to profile. I'm going to pick that element, so I'll right click, and then it wants to know the surface or reset for the active terrain. So I'll just reset, use the active terrain. I'm getting a starting location, and I'll tell it to start at 386, and I'm just going to take this out to 396. Now there's a couple options here that's going to step through. This point selection option should be up there. There's options there, all vertices and in centroid. We want it to do all intersections with the terrain. So The other options, I don't really see where those would be used. Vertices, ends, or the centroid of the alignment. It's just going to extract an elevation at only the vertices or only the ends. If you're doing something like, tying a profile to maybe the top of a head wall or something, then those options kind of make sense. But in this case, we want to do all intersections. And then there's a profile adjust here, and again, I don't know where these are actually used. Minimum it's going to just make a profile with a flat profile using the minimum elevation, or maximum is just a flat profile using the maximum elevation. So we're not going to use those options. So I'm draping it on the triangles, and horizontal offset is 0. I want it right at the center line. Vertical offset, I'm going to give this 0.25. Okay. All right, so I should have a profile in here for that limit. And one thing I see is it did not apply that feature definition to that, so I'm not clear why it didn't do that. It's still showing it as, so that's, oh, okay, yeah, that's normal behavior. It's really when I chain this together that it's going to apply the feature definition. So I mentioned, starting at a location where you might have full depth, I'm going to go ahead and place a line to tie that to my existing. And I'm going to use Civil AccuDraw to assist with that. So in Civil AccuDraw, in my profile view, I've got a profile offset option. So if you remember from the training, anytime you're doing an offset from something, you need to define that element. So if I tab to the offset field, I can type in the letter O to identify. So I'm offsetting from the existing ground. And I do want to set a feature for this, so let's try that again. All right. And I'll just call this a taper. So the individual pieces, I'm not really concerned about the name as much as when I make it a vertical alignment. So I'm going to start this just before that at 385 plus 50 with an offset of 0. So that's going to put that right on the ground. And then I'm going to draw that line to connect up with my offset. And I could also do that at the other end to tie back in. So just in the interest of time, I'm just going to leave it at this end. So once I've got those other pieces that I need to supplement that, I'm going to go ahead and complex this together. And again, I will use the alignment feature definition, and here I'm going to give it a name. So this is a proposed grade line along my existing State Route 185. So I'll use that to name this. So I'll go ahead and identify my elements, and now that's a profile. Okay. So this is a named profile using that name that I keyed in. So just like any other profile. I'm going to leave my existing ground as the active profile for now. So that's just a couple of tools that we did not have time to go over in the training. So some things there for offset profiles that you may or may not have been aware of. So I'm going to go ahead and save this file and then jump back over to my modeling file that I've got set up. And now we'll take a look at some of the different components that are available for modeling. So there is an overlay and stripping component, and this can be used for wedge courses or pavement planing. So when I'm entering this, I'm going to just choose the add an overlay stripping component, and then the behavior that's going to be just based on the parameters that I defined. So when you're adding it, it's just one command. So I'm going to start by giving you an example of a stripping component. And I know you probably can't read that on the projection, but we'll get into it and take a look at it there. But a stripping component allows us to define specific parameters for that. So it's probably best just to show it here in the template dialog. So I elected not to make canned templates. We're going to do everything on the fly here. So we're going to do a new template, and we're just going to name this stripping. pavement planing or whatever you want to do. So I'm going to right-click, add a component, and there's that overlay stripping component. So that's one that we did not cover in our training. And here's the properties for that particular component. So I'll give it a name just of stripping. And in my feature definition, we have some features for resurfacing type projects, and there's only two. There's one for pavement planing and one for a wedge course. So I'll use that pavement planing feature. And then I've got options to define the behavior of this. So I'm going to tell the top of this whether I want it to follow my existing ground surface, whether I want it to follow the component that I draw, or follow whichever is highest out of the two. Well, in this case, I'm just going to show maybe taking off an inch or an inch and a half of the existing pavement. So I'm going to tell it to follow the surface, and I'm not going to define any depth for that. But from the active surface, this is where I'm going to tell it how far to go down. So if I wanted to just take off an inch of pavement, I can type in that 1 divided by 12, and it'll do the math for me there. So on the right, there's a little checkbox to tell it that this is a stripping component, and that's really the only thing that's going to be different between the two is, well, the behavior of what you're following, and then this tells it to compute it as a removal or a stripping component. So I'm going to go ahead and enter my points, and I'm going to use under Tools Options, I've set a seed name for my point, so they'll all be named according to that seed. So I'm going to use a planing seed name. So as I enter these, they're going to be named using that. And I do have my prefixes on. I guess I can show you that in dynamic settings. We do have apply affixes turned on by default. So the actual width, I'm not going to worry about the width of this at this point. I'm just going to go ahead and enter a left point, a center point, and a right point. And then right click until it's finished. And I do want to define the behavior of these points. And the way I entered that, this is the origin. It's got a yellow icon for the plus sign, which means it's unconstrained. It's a little hard to see, but these two have a red plus sign, which means they're constrained. I want the planing point in the center to be my control point. So I double click on that. I'm actually just going to remove its two components. So it's kind of the parent point, and then I'll redefine this. So on the left side, we're going to tell it horizontally come off our center point, and again, I'm going to get to not going to worry about the distance right now. And what I want this to do is find my surface. Actually, I really don't even have to define this because part of the behavior is it's going to go find the surface anyway, but it's not going to hurt if I tell it project any direction, find the active surface. So we'll go ahead and apply that, and then I'll edit this point on the other side. And I really don't have anything to do with the horizontal because of the way it went in. The third point, it came relative to the second one. But I'll change this to project the surface, any direction, the active surface. So horizontally, it's constrained, so any direction, it can only go up or down. So we're going to come back and possibly make some changes to this. But that's really all there is to it, to a stripping component. The actual shape of it, its slopes don't matter because it really is just going to find the surface and then a depth based off of the parameters that I set here on the component itself. So let's take a look at how that works. So I'll go ahead and close this and save my library, and I'll create a corridor. So I'll select my center line and use the create corridor command here. And it's going to ask me to choose a profile, reset for active profile. I want to take just a mention here that if I look at my list of profiles, it's only going to show that proposed profile that I created. It's a named profile. So that existing profile that's, quote, not a named profile, it's just extracted from the terrain, doesn't show up in the list as available for you to choose. So that's why I made it active so I could process off of that as the active profile. So that's just something that that's just the way the software works. If I needed that existing ground to be a named profile, I could have used that, the profile from Surface Command to make one there, and it would overlap the terrain displayed profile. So I hope that makes sense. But anyway, I'm going to use the active profile. I'll right-click, and the name of my corridor here, I'll just name it planing. choose my template. I always like to browse to make sure I pick it so it's going to show the path for the template. I don't need civil AccuDraw, so I can turn that guy off and just move him out of the way. So I'll accept the template, and I'm going to start at 385 plus 50. Accept that, and we'll go up to 396. Accept that. Drop my template every 5 feet, and there's no transitions. So there's what is processed. And let's take a look at that in a cross-section mode. So I'll display cross-sections for that. Okay, so I can see I've got something incorrect. Now that's the risk of doing a live demo. So let's go back and take a look and see what I might have screwed up there. Any ideas there? Surface active.
Negative.
What's that?
Do you need negative depth?
No, the depth is. JD asked, do I need a negative depth? No, I don't. It's going to take that off. All right, so I'm not sure exactly what I've got wrong here. You take a quick look at one other thing where I've got this already defined. I see, okay, so I really don't need that center point. And I probably don't need those. All right, so I may have done some things I don't need to do, so I may have learned something, which is good. I'm just going to get rid of this constraint. I don't need that, because its whole job is to drape on the surface. All right, so I made a change to the template. So I'm going to synchronize that with the library by selecting my template range and synchronize. All right, I still have something wrong. All right. So, my apologies. I'm going to just re-enter that. Call surface, active surface.
John Finisher says the surface active.
That's what I was just going to say. I bet my surface isn't active. I close this, and I'm not going to save my change there. John's one step ahead of me, as usual. There you go. So let's tell it to reprocess. Did it get the terrain is active? Nope. Hooray. Okay. So that was the problem, is I didn't have my terrain active. So here's the stripping component, and I'm going to exaggerate the vertical a bit so you can see that a little better. So you can see it's traced the surface, and it's going down just an inch from the surface. So that's really all that component does, is just go out. So if you're removing some of the existing pavement, that's a way that you can use a component or a piece of your template to remove that, and it'll report the quantity for that for you. So I know I don't have much going on here, but if I look at my corridor itself and its properties, one of the reports is a component quantities report. So there's my pavement planing and the area for that, for this. Now that's not accurate because my width isn't accurate. So there's a couple of ways I can use or adjust the width. So what I want that to do is find my existing pavement and use that existing pavement line for the width. Now this is referenced from my survey. So the survey feature, unfortunately I cannot use a survey feature directly to tell it to meet that. It has to be an element that has a linear feature applied. Survey feature currently is not supported. We have a change request into Bentley to allow us to support or to select the survey feature, so I don't really know the status of that, whether they're considering implementing that or not, but we have requested that. So what I'm going to do is copy this element from my reference into the active file. So I'm just going to use a MicroStation copy command. And I'm just going to snap to that element. And copy it into this file. I think that was acting a little odd here, did it? Yeah. And I'll copy the next one. So I've got two elements in here, but again, they're just line strings. They're not really featureized, so they are duplicates. So what I'm going to do is assign a feature definition to that, and then it will be something that I can search for. So in my Geometry tab, I'm going to open my, okay, I already have it open, my feature definition toolbar. So I'm going to pick a feature. Now, JD and I haven't really talked about this in any detail, but we might want to add some features that kind of duplicate some of the survey features. So at this point, we haven't done that. So what I'm using is a feature that's just a scratch feature. So under the modeling group, so I'm looking at linear features under modeling, under the template features, there is a scratch group. So I'm just going to use this scratch 1. And I'm going to assign that as the feature on these two elements. So from my Geometry tab under Standards, I can set that feature definition. So I'll pick on this first element, pick on the second element, and then reset. And that should have set that. Now I saw my tool settings window, it didn't pick up this use active feature. So I've seen that happen to me once or twice. So what I'll do is just pick it from here on the element. Should have looked at my tool settings window before I actually applied that. So now that has a feature assigned to it. And you can see it does not have a profile defined, so it's just a copied element. I'm going to go ahead and apply this one, the same feature definition on the other side. And one thing I've noticed when I've been doing this is, although that has the feature definition assigned to it, it did not change the symbology. So I don't know really what's going on there. I have to talk to Bentley on that one and ask them whether it should be changing the symbology. I think it should, but I've noticed it's not doing that. So that's one we need to follow up with Bentley. So what I'm going to tell it to do now is meet those line strings. So there's a couple different ways I could do that. I'll show you both ways in two different templates here. So if I go back to my corridor and my template, one of the ways I can do that is on the point itself, I can define a horizontal feature constraint. So this is going to be an override of this horizontal offset value by finding a feature. Well, I'm going to have it find that scratch feature. And then there's a range. And the way the range works is it looks from the current offset of the point, and it's going to look for the closest element that has that feature if I have it set to 0. If I only want it to look in one direction, maybe I want it to continue looking out to the left, I could type a range of maybe -10 or -20 or something. So that's forcing it to keep looking to the left from its current location. So either way will work. I'll just leave it at 0 and it'll find the nearest one. The danger of 0 is that if I didn't have both sides identified, it would go all the way across to the other side. It's going to find the closest one in any direction. So I'll go ahead and apply that. And I'll do the same thing over here. I'll apply a horizontal feature constraint, looking for that scratch feature. And go ahead and apply that. So I made a change to my template library. I'll save that change. And now what I need to do is synchronize that change with my template drop. So the red dash is my template drop graphic, and from its pop-up menu I can tell it synchronize the template with the library. So now the template's been updated, but it still hasn't met the element. So the reason it hasn't met the element is in the software, they made a decision that any element that you're going to seek, it needs to be added as a corridor reference. So in the old, back in SS4, it used to search every element in the design file, every element in every reference attachment to find feature definition. So that was processor intensive, so they use a corridor reference. So in my corridor tools here, there's corridor references and there's add or remove a corridor reference. So I want to add this as a corridor reference. On this corridor, I'll add this line, and then right click, and now you can see it's jumped out to meet those elements, and in the cross-section view that's dynamically applied there. So that's one way that you can have it go find an element and meet that element. And I'll show you another way as we continue on. So that's the stripping component, and I think that's all I need to cover on that one. If there's any questions in the chat window, what do you got, Kyle?
Oh, great.
Okay.
Is that line not changing its appearance because although you changed its feature, it's still on the existing pavement level?
That's possible. Yeah, I never really looked at that, Andrea. Yeah, that's probably it. So, yeah, I would think when I set a feature to it, it should change its levels and its symbology. Yeah, I just need to get.
I think there's a template set. See, there's a template set. Survey, pavement.
Oh, here. Okay. All right, so we'll need to look into that and get some clarification from Bentley on that, because
Template's taken over.
Yeah, I think that's taken over. Can that be set to none?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what that does though. Okay, we'll have to just follow up with Bentley, get some clarification on that. I'm not sure. Okay, so that's a stripping component. Let's take a look at another one, like a wedge course. So I'm going to make a new template, and I'll just call this wedge course. And with this one, I'm going to add a couple things. So from our ODOT library under components, there's some pavement individual layers. So I'm going to drag in some pieces to build my two overlay layers, and then we'll go from there. Actually, I'm just going to put in one because that'll better illustrate the wedge course. So I'm going to just drag in an asphalt concrete surface course piece and grab that and drag that in. And as I'm dragging, I'm going to click the right button and tell it to reflect that. I'm sorry, I got to mirror that. So I have two of them. And I'm going to just drop that right on the center point. And then I'll fit that. And the reason I use this is because the point names are already named for the bottom and the edge of pavement and all that. So that's a good little resource there to if you want to build something from scratch. We've got some default pavement layers set up with the point names already assigned and all that stuff. So I'm going to use this as an example. So I'm going to add a new component, overlay stripping, and I'll just name this my wedge course. And I'll pick the feature symbology for that. Is the wedge course feature. Now I'm going to tell it the top option, I'm going to draw a component that goes right on the bottom of my pavement. So I'm going to tell it follow this component that I'm drawing for the top. For the bottom, I'm going to have it follow the surface of my terrain, and I'm going to have it go down an inch. All right, so if I'm planing off an inch, I want the bottom of this to follow the surface and go down an inch, and what this is going to do is fill in the difference between my my top layer and then that piece that's being planed off the bottom. So I'm going to start putting this in by just clicking to the points that are already there. Now, I notice down here the mirror option is still turned on. So I want to turn that off. So I'm going to right click and turn off mirror, because when I'm drawing it would mirror it, which I'd end up with a reflection of itself. so I don't really need that. So I've got those 3 points identified, and I'll hit finish, and that's really all there is to it. So let's close this out and save those settings, and let's apply this and take a look at how that works. So I'll create a corridor. Again, I'm on this one, instead of using the existing ground, I'm going to use the proposed that I made. That's 3 inches above. Now name this just example 2 or something. So I'll go pick that template I just created. And we're going to start at 385 plus 50. And we'll take it up to 396. Drop in a template every 5 feet and no transitions here. Okay, so taking a look at what I've got so far in the cross-section view. So it looks like the remote desktop froze up again. So next time we do this, we'll make sure we've got everything local and we're not remoting in. Okay, so I wanted to take a look at the cross-section view. So I hold down the right mouse button, 2 views, plan and cross-section, and I'm going to pick the corridor and display that down there. So this is starting at the very beginning where I was meeting ground. So let's move up a couple of sections and take a look at those 2 components. So here I've got my new profile that I had made that was 3 inches above. And then I just made a surface course that was 1.25 inches. So I've got those 2 components, and then here's that wedge course component that's going to just trace the component itself that I drew as the top, and then going down 1 inch off the bottom. So that's the other type of component that you can use in widening and resurfacing. So you've got the stripping component, and then if you depending on how you define its top and bottom, you can define it as filling in between what's stripped out and the bottom of your pavement itself. Okay. Any questions on that one at all? Same thing as far as the offsets here. I could, in my component, tell it this left edge pavement. I want a horizontal feature constraint, and we're going to meet that scratch line that we put in. So I'll apply that, and I'll do that over on the other side. Horizontal feature constraint, and we're going to match that scratch line. Save that, and let me, it's a small difference, but I'll zoom in on this so we can see that change when I do 2 things. First, I need to synchronize that change to the template. And since I had deleted my other corridor, this is a new corridor, I need to add those corridor references to this corridor, so the 2 elements. And I don't know if you saw that, but it jumped over as soon as I added those 2 corridor references. Okay, if there's no questions on that one, I'm going to move on.
There is.
Okay, what's your question on here?
Are the 2 templates there made already in the ODOT template library, or are we going to have to make our own?
These aren't currently in the library. That's one of the questions I have towards the end. So I've added a couple of templates, and I cleaned up a couple of things in some of the templates this week and last week. And that's one of the things I want to know is what else can we add for you guys, so we've got some stuff already defined in there. So as I get through the rest of them, you'll see what we currently have, and then we can go from there. All right, so I'm going to delete this corridor, and we'll just go on to the next thing. So back over in the PowerPoint, let me get myself back on track as far as where I need to be in our presentation. So there's the stripping example and how it's defined, and I had clicked on stripping component for that. And then there's the wedge course, and really you're just defining that top and bottom behavior, and it's not a stripping component, so I'm not checking that on. Okay. So I want to talk about what's in the template library currently and run a couple of those, and then we can go from there, what you guys would like to see added. So in our example templates, I mentioned I added a few this week. We haven't pushed that out yet, so they're not out there. And if you've already started a project, of course, you've already got a copy of the template library in your work set, so you wouldn't see these because they're in the standards. But you can copy in from the standards using the template library organizer if you like or need any of these. So we're going to look at a couple of these, and we're going to do, I plan to do 3 examples. So the first one's just 3 inches overlay, meeting my existing pavement width using a new cross slope and new shoulders. So that's the first example that I want to process, and we have a template for that. So looking at our template library, under ODOT, under the backbones, undivided roadways, there's some widening and resurfacing, and there's a couple there. I think that one was already in the library, and then I added a new one. So this was already in the library, but it wasn't up to date with some things that we had added to our template library later on based on some user requests. So it did not have any steps for the shoulder, so I added steps. And while I was at it, I also added those seek points that we talked about in the training. So if I had a driveway on the right side, there's a seek point for that drive right, and it's going to go find a horizontal feature constraint, and when it finds it, the drive right is set just to drop off those steps. If I had an intersection to the right, the intersection right, test that horizontal, is set to drop off the whole shoulder if there was an intersection over there. So I added those to this template. So there's some demonstrations on using those, and some of the videos we're starting to produce on the intersection modeling, and eventually we'll have some driveway stuff as well. I don't have any videos for that. So I'm going to process this one. So that was there, but it's been updated. I added one with just a turf shoulder. So that was something that why I was added. I added a couple here for the widening and resurfacing, or the widening stuff. So we had one there that was widening on both sides with a saw cut. So what I did was make one that was only widening on the left side. So I'm just meeting the edge pavement on the right. And then I added one that's only widening on the right side. So we can take a look. I'll probably just run this one. Okay, so what I'm going to do is process this one first. So I'm going to right-click to copy that, put it down here in my project templates, and I could rename that if I want. And I'm just going to run it as is first, and then we'll come back and make a couple of modifications to that. So we'll close this out, save that change. Go ahead and process this as is. So I'm making a new corridor again, and I'm going to use my proposed profile, and we'll just call this example for the name of the corridor, and change my template to the one I copied. And again, we'll start at 385 plus 50 and take it up to 396. Okay, so let's take a look at our cross-section view for this. Okay, so I did have a stripping component in there, and it's set to just probably an inch, and you can, if you're going to use the template, you can change that. And I'm meeting ground here, so there's different things there, how that ties in. Wasn't going to go into all that today, but certainly if you've got a project you're starting, we can talk about getting that to tie in. All right, so I want to move up somewhere where I'm in full depth. So there's a couple things here. So there is a component doing some pavement planing, taking off probably just an inch, and then there's a wedge course component defined in there, and then there's my 2 surface courses, 1 1/4 and 1 3/4 in the template itself. And this is set to use just a 1.6% cross slope. So this would be in the case where I am going out and correcting cross slopes. So I'm going to show you a couple of things with this where we can, maybe I'm not going to correct cross slopes. Maybe I'm going to meet the existing cross slope. So I'll show you a couple of modifications to this, how we can do some things like that. Okay, so just like the others, the first thing I probably want to do on this one is tell it to go out and meet that existing edge pavement. So it's the same thing that we had done previously. So in the template itself, on that left edge pavement, I can add that horizontal constraint. Actually, I'm going to do this a different way. JD had used a different approach to this, and that he reminded me of that. So I'm going to do that. The other thing I could use is a point control as a horizontal offset for that, instead of telling it to search for that. So what I want to do is, I've got my 3D model referenced here as well. I'm going to turn the 3D model off just to clear up a little bit of what I'm looking at here. So I've got that design 3D model. We'll just turn that off. So what I want to do is make this line match the existing. And I'm going to use a point control to do that. Now this one's pretty close, but depending on the center line in relation to the pavement, it may not be that close. So I'm going to go ahead and assign a point control to each of these edge pavement points. So in my corridor edits, there's create a point control. I can pick it from the ribbon, or I can pick it from the corridor handle graphic itself. If I select that and let its pop-up menu to come up into the tools, I think it's that one, just create point control. So whichever way you like to work. So it's going to ask me for a beginning station. I'm just going to tell it to go the full length of this corridor. So I'm going to use that alternate lock to start and alternate lock to end, accept that. And it's asking me for the a description here, so I'll just call this left EOP for my first one, give it a description, and then locate point. So there's a couple ways I can locate the point. I can graphically just click on the line that's drawn for it, or I can pick it from the drop-down list of all the points in the template itself. So I'm just going to pick that graphically. And then I have modes here of how I'm going to interact with my feature. I can have it meet it horizontally, vertically, or both. So in this case, I'm just going to do a horizontal offset. So I accept horizontal. If I was going to do vertical or both, this line would actually have to have a profile assigned to it. So currently it doesn't have a profile assigned to it. So we'll get into that here maybe in the next step. So I'm going to have it meet horizontal. What am I meeting? I'm meeting some linear geometry. The other options there are I can meet by a feature definition or a corridor feature. That would be a line in another corridor if I were meeting something from another corridor. So I'm going to just use linear geometry, and it's going to ask me to locate the plan or profile element. So I'm going to pick that. And we're not using this as a secondary alignment. No offsets. So there I can see it's gone and adjusted to meet that, and I can do the same thing on the other side, add a point control for this one. So again, I'll just step through the dialog, alternate lock to start, alternate lock to end. This is going to be for my right edge of pavement. We're going to use that line, and you can see here it picked the point name when I clicked on that. We're going to do it horizontal, using linear geometry, using this element, and I'll just accept the rest of the defaults. So that's an alternate way to do that, rather than adding the horizontal constraint override in the template. I could just use a point control to match that element. Oh, yes. So JD reminded me of something. In this current release, in my template, so I overrode this point. There's no feature name override assigned. So that's getting a little deep into functionality here. And some of our template points have a feature name override assigned. So in this release, if there's a feature name override assigned, the point controls don't recognize that point. And that's a bug, and it's been fixed in the new release that actually was just released yesterday. So whenever we move to that new release, that feature name override bug has been fixed. So to some of you that have been using this, that probably makes sense. But you'll know it's a problem if you assign a point control and it doesn't apply. If there's a feature name override assigned, then that's a bug currently. Anything else I need to mention?
You typically see it when you're doing your ditch profiles, because the ditch point, that's where majority of people see it.
Yeah.
And they go, why isn't that ditch point showing up? That's why. Just go into that and just uncheck the feature name override, and then it'll show up.
So here's a 3-to-1 cut, and this point has a feature name override assigned. So if you're making a ditch profile and it's telling it go meet the elevation on a ditch profile using point control, that feature name override interferes with it in the current release. It's been fixed moving forward. So it's something to be aware of. And I don't have if someone asks, I don't have a time frame when ODOT will be moving to that new release. There's several things for ODOT to consider before they make any decisions on that. So a couple questions there, Kyle? Or? Nope? Okay. Okay, so let me close out of this. Well, let's say, that's great. I'm not going to do this wedge coursing. I'm just meeting what's out there. I'm just going to overlay the existing pavement that's out there, matching its cross slope, but I am putting in some new shoulders. So how would I do that? Match the cross slope. So that's the next thing that I want to talk about. I think that's what I have next, at least in my PowerPoint. Yeah. So the second example, we're going to be overlaying and meeting existing pavement weight and meeting its cross slopes. So there's, again, a couple different ways that could be approached or handled. One way that this could be approached is these lines were copied and given a feature, but they don't have a profile. So it says that they're no active profile. If I assign a profile to that, then in my point control, I could have it meet that both horizontally and vertically. But I've got a little problem with my template if I do that. Looking at the way the template's defined, this point is defined as slope from the PGL. So it's really, this point is really the point that I need to hit existing ground. So I can't really just tell it to have this meet that offset and that elevation both. So I did a point control to have it meet the offset, but I can't have it meet the elevation. And in the point controls, I don't think there's any way you can't give a vertical, parameter or something like that. I can't just assign this point because everything's defined as far as the constraints. They're defined from the top down. So if I assign that, it's just going to move it up. The other points aren't in relation to that. So I'm going to do a little, maybe a little deeper thing here with templates. I think my remote desktop locked up on me again. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, maybe this is a little deeper function here, but I'm going to add a null point. Okay, I'm just going to put it over here on the left side. I'm going to use this point as a control point. You'll see as I go. So I'll name this left X EOP. What I want this to do is, I'm going to give it a horizontal from my PGL, which is really going to be irrelevant because we're going to end up overriding it to meet the line that's our surveyed line. And I'm going to tell it to project to surface, any direction, the active surface. Okay, and again, there's two ways I could tell it to meet that existing edge pavement. I could use the feature constraint to find my scratch element, or I could use a point control, either one. Okay, so I've got this point, and what it's going to do is, again, horizontally, it's going to meet that element. Vertically, it's going to project to my active surface any direction, so it's only going to up or down. I'm going to use that to control these points. So I'm going to change the constraints on my edge pavement. Instead of a slope from the horizontal, I'm going to change it to be a vertical constraint from this point of 0.25 above it. Okay, so it's thrown everything out of whack here, but it looks a little odd. So 0.25 puts me at the bottom, so I have 2 points on top of each other. So horizontally, it's going to find my plan view feature. Vertically, it's going to project the surface, and then that point will be 0.25 above it. Okay? Hope that makes sense. So I really don't care what it looks like here. And I'm going to go do the same thing on the other side. We could probably just demonstrate it with just the one, but I'll go ahead and throw one over here. I'll name this one. It's going to seek the right existing edge pavement. And both of these, I did not worry about the feature definition. These are just points that are going to be used to go find something and meet it. I'm not using it to draw any plan view graphics. So the feature definition is what's going to draw our 3D graphics and our 2D graphics. I really don't care about that. They're just used to control and manipulate this template. So with no feature definition, it does end up putting a line, a 3D line, on the default level. So I thought I should mention that. So horizontally, it's going to come off our PGL, and I'm going to project surface, any direction, active surface. And then we'll change this. Instead of sloping at our normal slope, we're going to change it to be vertically from that one to 5 above. Okay, so my template looks a little strange, but I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, so I made changes to my template library, so the first thing I'll do is synchronize this. And now I need to tell it for that existing edge pavement point that I want it to find the control line there. And I'm going to use the little bucket command here to review what I've got and make some changes. So when I pick the little water bucket there, the corridor objects command, it wants to know which corridor. So I'll choose my corridor. And I'm going to use this. I added point controls. What I'm going to do on these is just turn them off, because I'm going to use that edge of pavement point as my controlling point. So I'm going to turn that one off. Or I could just delete them if I don't need them. But turn that one off. So what that's done is brought it back to the initial template definition. So that top edge pavement, asphalt, concrete, surface course, edge pavement point is no longer constrained to meet that. What I'm going to do instead is constrain that left existing edge pavement point that I added. Actually, I could have just left those active and changed the point that's using here. I haven't tried that. Should I try that, JD? Why not? All right. So instead of overwriting that right, that's not showing. I synchronized the template. That should show that in the list. Well, that's odd. All right, so let's ignore that. Let's go back and do what I should have done. What's that?
There was an override on it.
No override on it. So it should. So let's try this and see if I did synchronize the template, didn't I?
Is it a different template?
Yeah. No, it's the same template. I edited the same template. All right. Well, let's just try it this way, adding the point control. Okay. On this corridor. And I'm just going to go the full range, and this is find that right. Did I edit the wrong? What a rookie. So Kyle's on target. I think what I did Yeah, look what I did. So the one that was left active was the one in the library. So I actually did not edit this one that I copied. So don't do what I did. So even after, all right, so let's delete this one. Actually, it doesn't matter. It's in a copy of the library. I'm going to delete this one. And copy that one down there. So, okay. Now let's try that. So on this corridor, beginning to end, okay, that's my name, so my point. Now I probably need to resynchronize that since I copied that. Yep. All right.
Just click on it.
Yeah, so it's,
to go to the properties and template drop, you can change it right there.
so that should be it. So even though it had the same name, it still didn't find it for some reason. Okay, so one more time. Add point control to this corridor. What am I doing, JD? What's that?
Open your photo object. It's red.
Yeah, it's still not finding it. Still acting like it's still acting like it's not finding it. Let's just totally change the name of it. That might be. Just to make sure. Okay, so it's definitely pointing to it there. So one more time. It's corridor, beginning, ending. There it is. So don't do what I did and edit the wrong template. So we're going to use just a horizontal constraint, linear geometry, that element. Okay, so that has brought that, should bring that to meet that. So that's still not giving me what I expected there. Oh, because I did the wrong, I did, yeah. All right. Sorry, guys. There we go. I'm still not looking right. Now that I've totally botched example 2, let me try it one more time.
It's not on the right. I mean, you changed the right one. Right.
Oh, okay.
You're doing the
Got
right
it.
side.
It's still off a little bit, but it's meeting Yeah. So I still have the wrong points.
Let's go back to the
Yeah.
feature, search horizontal feature.
Yeah.
Set a point.
Well, I was just going to just delete it and make sure I've got it right from the start. All right. So this corridor, let's do the left and make sure I get the left point. And the right. And make sure I get the right point. Okay, so it is meeting the slopes. Okay, so a couple of missteps there. My apologies for that, but I hope everyone's got the idea of what we're doing there and how that's intended to work. Okay, so the last one I wanted to do was just using that, adding a turn lane, or adding a lane on one of the sides. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this corridor and just do one more. Okay, so looking in our templates, and I'll make sure I'm careful to edit the right one. So there's some for widening, and I mentioned this one had been there previously that was set up for a saw cut line on both sides, and then I added one for just saw cutting on only the left and saw cutting on only the right. I'm going to go ahead and process this one by copying that and double clicking to make sure it's the active template, which was my mistake. Previously, I did not double click to make that the active template. And I'm not going to make any edits. Save that copy of that template. And what I need is a couple of lines to act as our saw cut line. So I'm going to go ahead and take these out. I could probably use those, but those two copied lines that are in there, I'm going to take those out and copy two new lines. So under drawing, I'm going to use the move parallel command, and we'll make a copy. And I'm just going to bring this in a foot, and I'm going to bring that existing edge pavement, copy that in a foot, and copy this one in a foot. Okay, so I'm going to target those two as my saw cuts. So I'm setting a feature definition to that. I can use the scratch feature. Again, we talked about maybe adding some feature definitions that are specifically intended for targeting instead of using the scratch features. So we might add, like an edge pavement, edge shoulder, sidewalk, just some common existing features that you might be targeting. And again, we do have a change request from Bentley to allow targeting survey features, but it currently doesn't allow that. So I'm going to set a feature definition on this and this. Make sure it's, I don't know why it's not picking that up. I turned it on, turn it off, and it picked it up. So good catch. All right, so those two should have a feature definition assigned. So I can see the features assigned to each of those. Yeah. Okay, so in my template itself, I can, again, use either a point control or in the template, in this saw cut point, I can have that search. I actually do already have a feature constraint already defined in the standards, so I should have used that one. I should have looked here first. pavement, there is a saw cut line feature definition that I could have used. And it's still misbehaving on that set command. So you see it's still staying, so it looks like I've got to turn it off and turn it back on for it to actually get the active feature. So we need to talk to Bentley on that one. Okay, so it is set as a saw cut. So let's go ahead and process that template. And I'm just going to process using the active, which is my existing profile. Okay, so I need to add those as corridor references in order for it to find those. So we'll use the add corridor reference command on this corridor, that element, and that element. All right, I had something selected already, so let me make sure nothing's selected. Try it one more time. That element and that element. And now we'll take a look at our cross section. So it's just finding that saw cut line, and then from there, there's an extra foot, and then applying that. So there's really not, much to demonstrate on that. And again, I probably should have used the proposed profile to put it up, and then it would have been in actually where I wanted that to show up on the proposed profile. Another thing on this one, yeah, there's a pavement planing option here. So if I would put it up on the proposed profile, that would have made more sense where that is located. So I should be able to just change that here on my properties, and instead of using the active profile, I'll use that proposed profile. There we go. And you can see it adjusted the starting limit because my proposed profile didn't start until 385 plus 50. So that makes a little more sense with the way I had that defined. Okay, so I think that's really everything we wanted to cover as far as examples of widening and resurfacing. So some things there to think about. Am I, meeting my existing cross slopes? How do I want to control that? Am I putting in new cross slopes, new shoulders, whatever. So if there's no questions on that, I'm going to move on.
There's one more.
Yeah.
Say you're adding a turn lane, how would you taper the existing?
Okay.
Taper to existing.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to use a point control for that, or actually a parametric constraint for that. So in the template itself, on the edge pavement point, it has a label assigned. So there's a right lane width for this one. There's also a label for shoulder width. And on the left side, that point has a label assigned. Oh, that one doesn't. So we need to make sure we get that in there. I thought I added that. I'll make sure I review those templates to make sure that those are assigned. So with those labels assigned, those can be defined parametrically. So let's just put a lane here. So in my edits, I'm going to define a parametric constraint.
Andrea said she uses point controls for almost everything. Why would you use a parametric constraint if it's
So Andrea's question is why use a parametric constraint? I don't have to draw a line for that. I can just use it, define so I'm overwriting the horizontal value. So let me go back to that template. I probably breezed through that a little too quickly, but on that edge pavement point, so that label is assigned to the horizontal constraint. So I'm going to overwrite that horizontal value. So point control will work fine. I just have to draw a graphic for that, and it has to be a featurized graphic.
Also, processing-wise, a parametric constraint is, I guess, better to use over point control in terms of processing. So point control is going to eat up more processing than a parametric constraint. So on smaller projects, you might not care, but you got a big one going on. You know, you might want to gravitate towards a parametric constraint where you can and save a little bit on processing. But.
So I'm going to start this point control. So I'm just using this parametric constraint. So I'm using the create parametric constraint command. I'm going to start it from 386. I'm going to stop it at 387, 100 feet. And my constraint label is my right lane width. So I'm starting at 12 feet, tapering to 24 feet. So that defines a transition. And then on this corridor, I can start at 387 plus 00. And I'm just going to take it all the way to the end. So I use the alternate key to lock to end. So the same label. So I'm starting at 24 feet and ending at 24 feet. That adds that extra lane. And you can see that in my sections as I move forward. Okay.
And then come back to the processing-wise, you know, if the lane's longer than your transition, then you might just do the lane width in your template, have it draw the extra lane, and then just have the constraint just to taper it back. So
Sure.
your constraint is just that taper length. So processing-wise, you're saving yourself too. But
yeah.
Either way works. I would assume most people might gravitate towards setting their width in the template and then tapering back in. But either way works.
So I'll just change this to 24. I would start with that and then just use the point or the parametric constraint just to override the taper area. I guess it's 6 of one, half dozen the other because I may have a longer portion, you know, up here I'll have to define that as starting and ending at 12 feet too.
Yeah.
So either way, yeah, that's a good option too.
Good questions.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So as far as widening and resurfacing typed templates, that's what's currently in the library. And anything that you guys would like to see added as just available, and all the templates, you know, I mean, it's easy to get overly, you know, too many templates with too many scenarios. You know, at some point you need to take what's there and manipulate it to apply to your project, but we definitely want to provide a basis at least that covers, you know, a variety of scenarios that you guys might typically encounter. So anything you want to see is just let JD or I know. You know, there's some other, okay, we typically have done, you know, widening resurfacing type projects that are, you know, like this, so we could get a template in there for you to use as a starting point on that. So I want to transition to looking at our existing stuff and how can I show existing pavement on here, especially on something that maybe is a concrete removal area, that type of thing. So in order for it to show in the cross sections, you know, it's reading that from the model, so it's got to be modeled. So there's a couple different ways that this could be approached, and it depends on, you know, what you've got and what you need. What I'm going to do is just put in just a basic 2 layers of existing pavement, and I'm going to show probably 2 ways to do this. First one is going to use a surface terrain. And just to, yeah, I'll just do it through here, that's fine. So what I want to do is pick my elements that are going to define the surface of my pavement, and then I can apply a template to that. So a template that it doesn't really, since I'm applying it to a surface, the surface is going to define the slopes, so the template doesn't really matter. So I'll make a new template for existing pavement and add a simple component. I'm just going to name this existing asphalt. And we have a couple feature definitions for some existing things, and we probably need to add some more. So that's, again, you guys, as you start working through this, let us know what you need. So I've got a concrete pavement and an asphalt pavement item. So maybe what's out there, the slope doesn't matter. You know, maybe there's 3 inches of asphalt out there, and the width doesn't really matter either, because it's going to apply it to a terrain. So I've got a component here for 3 inches of asphalt. The names of the points really don't matter either, the names and features on the points, because it's just going to, it's not going to draw any 3D line strings from any of this, because it's just applying the material or the item to the terrain. So I'm not going to worry about the point names. Oops. I'm going to add a second one, simple component, and I'm going to call that EX concrete. And I'll use the existing concrete feature, and maybe there's 9 inches out there of that. So I'll just drop that on the bottom of that. Okay, so we're going to save this. And what I want to do is make a surface terrain. So I'm going to use my surveyed lines to create a surface terrain. So I'm actually in a 2D file referencing my field book, which is 3D. So they are 3D elements that I can use to make a terrain from. Now, I probably don't want to do that in this file. I probably want to do that in a separate file. So I'm going to use JD's application to create design files. And I don't know that we specifically have a file type for modeling existing features. You could just make another 3D modeling file and put it in there. And I'll just call this, or give it a comment of existing features or existing items. And this is going to be a 2D file. So I'll go ahead and create that file. And in this file, I'll reference my survey. So I'll pick my references or my attached tools, and I'm going to grab the survey. That one. And I'll make the terrain active, which I forgot to do at the very beginning of this presentation. All right, so I've got a couple levels here with my existing edge pavement. There's also a surveyed center of pavement, and that level was off in the survey. So I'll do a Control E to go to level display, or level displays on the home tab over here. So get to it that way. So in my field book file, I'm going to turn on that center of pavement level. So I'm going to use that as well. So I'm going to use these elements to make a terrain. All right, and I would probably want to do this for the whole length of the project, so you can select all the elements. I'm just going to do it for the elements that I can see right here, because these aren't necessarily a continuous line for the whole length of the survey. There could be multiple edge pavement lines, center pavement lines that I want to make that terrain from. So I'm going to do a terrain from elements, and I'm going to first do the edges as a boundary of this terrain. And in my feature definitions for this terrain, under existing, we just added an existing pavement surface feature definition. So it's not in the distributed standards yet, but that's something we just added. So I'm going to use this element and this element. And I can continue picking additional elements, and I'll just go ahead and do those, and then reset when done. So those two elements It's going to be a boundary, and I'm not going to worry about any edge methods. And maybe I should have. Okay, so what in the world did that do? Okay, I don't know how many times I've done this, and I've not seen it do that to me.
It's like it didn't get you.
It's like it didn't get, yeah. All right.
Like that second, is that line separated right there? Those two even lines. Wherever that break was.
Turn off the triangles over here. Let's turn off that background map as well.
Is this a line break right here? Is that a new line?
As far as I know, it's not a new line.
Okay,
See, it's all one element. So, gosh, guys, I don't know how many times I've done this, and I've not seen it do that. Let's try that one more time. From elements, I want this element and this element. It is a, okay, that's probably why. So I need some other additional elements here. I know in the survey, having worked with this, that there is a survey break line through here. I'll pick that and I'll pick that. All right. That should give me better results. I could add these as well. It's just going to bridge the gap across there. And I shouldn't have to worry about an edge method. Since this is a boundary, it should. Okay, that looks better. Yep. I know what happened, why I haven't seen that in the past. Okay, so now I want to add the center of pavement as a break line to that terrain. So in my terrain groups, so that's creating a terrain from elements, picking the elements, and feature management, I can add a feature to that terrain. So to this terrain, for my surface, I'm going to add center of pavement. And again, I may have multiple lines to select here. It looks like that is all one line in the survey. Pick that as well. There's some overlap there, so that's some survey issues, but that should work for the purpose of this illustration. So I'm adding that as a break line. And so now I have a surface terrain for my existing pavement. Okay, so what I want to do on this terrain is apply that template. So if I go back to model, go to model detailing, it's a command to apply a surface template. So the template is that existing pavement on this terrain model. And I'll just accept the defaults. So the actual material used is pretty ugly. We need to look at that. But so what I've got, if I rotate my 3D view around, is some materials here for the asphalt and the concrete. So the way that's going to show up in my cross section, if I go back over to my corridor design file, I'll attach that as a reference. So that was a KM2. And I'll probably need to redisplay the cross-section view for that to show up. So it's either levels or, I think when I did it the other day, I had to get out and get back in for the cross-section view to actually recognize it. Just take a quick look at levels. Yeah, it's not picking up those from the model. I think I had to get out and get back in for it to actually pick that up after I attached the reference. I know John Biddinger's done some of this. John, if you're still listening, have you run into that where you had to get out and get back in for it to pick that up? Got a question there?
He has had to exit out sometimes on different occasions to get back.
So there, I can see it's showing up now. So there's my concrete area and my asphalt area. Okay, so that works well if you don't need to show this as being a stepped value, right? Because I'm reading the edge of pavement surveyed on the top, so the width of that is based on edge of pavement. If that is wider and you need to show a step, then I need to approach that from a template and a corridor type approach where I'm going to make an element that's 3 inches below the surface and then is wider. So that one's one I should have just had a canned template already prepared because there's a few steps to that. So I'm not sure, we're getting close to needing to wrap this up. So what I can do on that is leave that to a future discussion, or when we actually go back through this and make some more polished demos that we'll publish on the website, we can add an example using a template. But so that's the idea there. So anything that you need to make a surface terrain from, if you had a driveway that was some concrete and it was, you can make a terrain from that element or those elements. For driveways, sidewalks, anything that's you need to show a depth to, and then that stuff's going to show up in the 3D model and in the cross section. So I don't know if there's anything else we really need at this point. JD, do you have anything you want to add to any of that?
No, other than that, we'll post this recording, and then we do also plan on making, shorter videos that go over each kind of thing individually, so you don't have to watch when the screen freezes, us closing the remote session, coming back in, all the fluff in between. But again, that'll all be on the wiki page. And then what Eric said he didn't get to show was creating your existing surface through template. That's really kind of like what he showed in the beginning, just using his feature constraints and how he was tying things into the edge pavement. And just your template would represent the existing pavement rather than the proposed stuff. But we can do a video for that as well.
Yeah. So who's that?
That's John.
John.
Yeah, saying JD and I were trying to do it with templates, and it was a little bit more complicated. I think applying a surface template is the way to go if possible.
Yeah. Now, if you're going to use this for removal areas of the concrete, and it is stepped, then you're not getting as good of a quantity. And
John, what we were trying to do was a bit more complicated.
Yeah.
What we're referring to is just basically tying your template to meet vertically and horizontally at your edge pavement, which can be done. What we were trying to do was with the overlay and stripping components, and that could not. We couldn't get that to work.
Yeah, the overlay stripping component's really not going to allow you to do that. It would just be a normal component, and
I thought we were trying to get concrete under asphalt.
Yeah, so that's what I've got here. It's just limited to the width of the surveyed lines. And I can't just copy those out and use it because that would apply to the asphalt area either. Of course, if you're just going to turn off the level for the asphalt because you really don't need that for anything, right?
So the main difference is when you do it this way, it's following your surface basically, but with the template approach, it's a straight slope. So
yeah.
And so what Binger is kind of referring to is we were trying to make the overlay component work, and we couldn't get it to work.
It's not designed for that.
Christoph says he doesn't worry about the existing pavement steps and quantifying removal quantities, and he hasn't had any complaints. So he doesn't include.
Okay.
How do you handle spot elevations to make the existing pavement terrain model match the survey terrain model?
I'm not sure what you're asking, Scott.
We can unmute everyone.
Yeah, if you want to unmute.
So we're going to unmute everyone, so if you guys don't...
All conference participants are now unmuted.
So that... Scott, maybe... Are you on the mic, Scott? Oh, okay, never mind.
It looks like...
You can add spot elevations to that terrain model when you're making the surface model. I'm assuming because we added break lines, so you can add spot features to that terrain model too. I'm not sure if that's what he's doing or not. Yeah, it's the same way with adding that break line when we added that center pavement. You can add spots instead of just break lines as well as a feature.
Yeah.
Feature management.
So I'll just pick.
Just use the drop down to show break line.
So there's your options.
So you can add spots into that tree.
So, I guess where I'd like to go from here is, you guys found what we showed beneficial, but if you guys maybe have different use cases for this that you might have questions on, let us know those kind of cases. Maybe this didn't address everything that we needed to address, and I feel like just as we go through things, we'll identify more things here, but we like that feedback from you guys. If there's something that you wanted to see on this topic that maybe we didn't show, you can shoot me an email. But kind of what other topics you guys are interested in seeing. So we had that tentative list up there, but in that order.
We do have one question in District 3 up here. How detailed do you expect us to get on just like a regular resurfacing that we don't have survey for? Is that still just going to be regular like 2D like what we do in MicroStation now, or are we going to be doing this kind of template stuff based off like LiDAR or something like that?
Nope. If you don't have survey data, then you don't need to make a model. And you just make the plan basically the same way you've been making it.
Okay.
No, we're not going to make you do all that extra work for just a simple resurfacing project.
Okay, thank you guys.
Where all this is really coming into play is when you're doing things like adding, saw cutting, adding new shoulders, or that type of stuff. So just a plain resurfacing where you're not really doing that type of work. You just continue as you have in the past. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, we're still delivering sheets at this point. So I guess if there's no other questions or comments, we can conclude the first CAD webinar. So I think it went pretty well. We'll change some things on our end to go a little bit smoother. But hopefully you guys found it beneficial. It's just, I know with this transition there's a lot of worry and a lot of questions. So we are mainly working on training videos, this stuff, the training guide. So we're trying to identify workflows and help as you guys come across things. So don't forget about that February 11th CAD like kind of consultant webinar that's open to everyone. We will kind of be showing some of this again, but another topic on that agenda is some stuff on SUDA, kind of where we're at, some options, some workflows to do some different things. So you guys might be interested in that as well. But this concludes this first CAD webinar.